My name is Don Price from Atlassian, and I'm Atlassian's word futurist. But at Experts Unleashed, I want to do something different with you. I want to bring experts from their field to you. Experts that aren't going to talk about thought leadership or theory, but they're going to bring their lived experience, their pragmatic insights, and their stories to help you unleash your potential. So the format of this show is incredibly simple. It's all based on three things. Every single session we do with an expert and Experts Unleashed, we're going to have three chapters, three core things that they are famous for, where we go through the theory, we go through the practice, and we get them to share one insight that you can try. So listen in for the three chapters. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 456, who's counting? I'm not, of Experts Unleashed, a show where we take thought leadership, we throw it out the window because it's a complete waste of time. We're done with it. And instead, we get experts in their field to come to you, share their inspiration, their lived experience, and their examples of how you can lead a better life, how you can be a better leader, better operator, better worker. This week's guest is a phenomenal person. Before I get on to him, let me quickly acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land I join you from today. I'm joining you from Sydney, the home of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Really important to me to pay respects to elders past, present. 60,000 years of history I'm sat on today. And I think one of the things that we're going to talk about with today's guest is how we can start to tap into some of that history. So who is our guest today? It is the phenomenal human being, Andy Walshe. Now, a couple of things about Andy. I used to have a man crush on Andy. I still do a tiny bit, but I don't want him to get a big head. I actually met Andy in the UK. We were both doing an event with Richard Branson. We're at the same networking event, and we did the eye contact thing where we're like, this is really boring. Let's get out of here. We got out of there. We sat, we ate steak, we drank beer. And at the end of that conversation, Andy just made that passing comment. He's like, mate, at some point, somewhere in the world, let's do something together. And as sure as shit, like 6 months later, he just rang me on my phone. I didn't even know he had my phone number. He's like, I'm doing an event in LA. You got to get here. It's going to be awesome. And I had one of those, like, why not moments. I had no idea. He didn't tell me what it was, didn't tell me what I was doing. Like, there was absolutely zero context, nothing. And I'm like, you know what? Something in my little spidey brain says, why not? Let's cover the flight and get out there. One of the best experiences that I have had, but also started a whole series of other experiences. And I have a deal. If me and Andy are ever in the same remotest location or country in the world, we hang out because I learn something from this absolute idiot every single time. He is irreverent. He's mischievous. Please, ladies and gentlemen, give me a big, warm Experts Unleashed welcome to Andy Walshe. Andy, how are you doing today?
Well, mate, you always overdo it on those, but I'm doing great. I'm great. So, yeah, I'm excited to be here and also excited just to hear a little bit about what you're up to as well. So,
awesome. So two things I want to do to get started, Andy. One is, like, I know what you do, or I think I know what you do because we've interacted a few times. Like, if you get caught at a dinner party, because you've got twins as well, right? You've got a missus who's more successful than you. So you're at a dinner party and someone's like, so what is it that you do? And you take a sip of your wine and you give them the 30-second pitch. What is it?
Oh, and I usually just say I'm a coach and then I leave it at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, and because that's where I started. I started off as a coach in the Australian system there and I cut my teeth in the human performance world, but that just grew. So I think the easiest way to summarize it, I've just been really extraordinarily fortunate to spend time over the last 30 years with people who are really good at what they do. Yeah. And I took some notes along the way, you know, when they won, why they won, when they lost, why they lost. And the beauty of my sort of career is I've been able to sit in just about every community of performance expertise, yes, from arts to military to sports. So it's been a fun one just to learn from all these extraordinary humans along the way.
So Andy's an essentially humble guy. So let's talk about like some of those headline moments quickly. I mean, the one I remember early on from like when I Googled you when we first met was Bull Stratos, right? And yeah, and the free fall from space. So like, what was your role in that as an example?
You know, typically I get called when things are going terribly wrong.
Yeah.
You know, it's fix what's broken. You know, to be more blunt with Stratos, it was a project that Red Bull had designed to, you know, send a guy out of a capsule at 130-something thousand feet. He was having a few challenges along the way with respect to just navigating the training and the whole framework of the performance. So I was brought in as the performance director to that to help him understand how we could get through this and also build the team back a little bit. So it was a bit of an individual team sort of conversation that we had. And yeah, it took another 4 years. So yeah, but it worked out well in the end.
So, and then just to click through, because you're quite subtle and you mentioned there, in the conversations I've had with you since, whilst I think a lot of your history was elite human performance in a sports or competitive standpoint. You've now branched out and you're doing that in arts, right? In military, in a variety of different sports, but also just like corporates. Like, how do they understand elite performance?
Yeah, I think we've navigated. We were very early. Obviously, Australia was very well known in the early days in human performance in sports as part of that Olympic build-up for Sydney in 2000. That model, wanted to replicate that in sports over here, both Olympic and professional. It was really picked up early in the US by some of the military communities, special units in that community. And then when I landed at Rebel, they threw me into the artists, the filmmakers, the designers, the musicians. And then it just dawned on me that we were really good at going into worlds that had not typically had the sort of what you'd call traditional human performance support. And educating, learning, and building in partnership sort of this new goal. So that sort of led into things like gaming and esports. Sort of some of the corporate stuff that you mentioned. Now more recently, gosh, it's peace builders. Clergy, hackers. Hackers is a big program for us with the government right now. So yeah, it's a mix.
So just as an example to our audience, the last time, not the last time we hung out physically, that was in Sydney when you brought the kids over, but the last time we hung out at an event, over like a coffee break, I was chatting to the X400 meter world record holder, Michael Johnson, who's like a phenomenal human being. Like I grew up with, I not physically grew up with him, but like grew up with watching him on TV. I was chatting to him. I was chatting to an elite gamer. I was chatting to a hacker, and then I had a conversation with a cultural anthropologist. And someone with Indigenous history talking about reconciliation. And I'm like, how is this like? It was a mind-boggling thing. But how do you, like, when you say human performance? If you just click through on that, what are the elements in there that for a layman we should be thinking about?
I think people get caught up in working out, fitness, because that's the classic narrative in the athletic sense. But even the athletics world, it's so much deeper. You get into the physiology, the biomechanics, the science of the movement. You get into the psychology, the character. You get into these broader conversations very quickly, especially the more elite you get. And that, when you go into other communities, it's usually a mixed match of the same things. There's the technical, tactical. What do they do? Which we typically never touch.
No, because you're not the expert in that.
No.
You're an expert artist. You're not going to teach them how to hold a brush better.
Yeah. Well, you've just sold a Grammy Award-winning album, and by the way, you're that other tune, that's definitely where we shine. No, but the reality is, it's all those other elements that support the performance and the technical, tactical, and it can be technologies like today. It can be deep, ancient sort of wisdoms based on sort of anthropological learnings and lessons from the past. So this reality is, we don't hold any sort of mantra close to our chest when it comes to this. We put you or the team or the organization at the middle of this question of what is it to become an extraordinary human, first and foremost, before extraordinary at what you do. And what are the levers that we could pull that you're willing to sort of take on as well? It's not, these are all the things that make you extraordinary. There's a lot, but what are the ones that you really feel like you would like to work on? And that's the partnership conversation.
Yeah, and the person with you. I love that.
Yeah, it can be anything. Honestly,
Yes, Andy, at the start of every show, we do a My User Manual. I've been doing it with my teams for years now. I know you have an equivalent you call My iOS, right? And I know when you shared yours, you shared it with our team, and everyone was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And then you shared the different environments you use it in. I think mine was blown. I've been running this with teams at Atlassian for years now, and it's fascinating. It's a complete game changer, right? You go and buy a TV, and it comes with My User Manual, right? You go and hire a human, there's no user manual. And so just a simple tacit exercise just for you, like if you were to pick one area of a user manual and just share with our audience, like how does Andy lead? Like what's your style? Which one would you pick?
Given where the world is today, I think that, what brings you back to center, what grounds you, the centering question.
Yeah.
Because I think if I had to say anything to anybody on the call, on the show, that's probably the thing that you need to focus on nowadays, especially if you live in the Western world. So I think that's the one I love. For me,
what brings you back? What are your techniques for? I mean, I know the world you exist in, right? There's a huge amount going on there, right? You've got a wonderful wife, you've got gorgeous kids. Like when you need to anchor back and just be, Dad Andy or Husband Andy or whatever. What are your techniques for doing that?
What it is, it's taken me a long time, but I think the reality for me is, one, it's perspective. It's the classic. It's the, you just take a step back and, really, is this going to matter tomorrow? Is it going to matter in 10 years? That, what am I here for? And what's the game? And I find that my second choice is getting into nature drives that, So if I can get outside into anything that's non-vertical, non-linear, I can get into space where there's a bit of natural setting and natural environment, and the research is powerful on that as well. But for me, the beach, surf, some sport, some out in the mountains, whatever it may be. And then the third one for me is, the classic. The number one tool for resilience is, as anyone knows, is one good friend. So it's people like you. It's my family. It's someone I can just sit with and just relax, and that again sort of ties back to the first one. It gives you perspective,
It's mate. That's what I think. I don't want to sort of generalize on the sexes because I'm not an expert, but I think that one's significantly harder for guys. I don't know if it's like just something I woke up to in my mid-40s that I realized that like I feel very fortunate. I've got a good group of guy mates that I can chat guy things about in a non chest beaty, arrogant, egotistical way. But I'm like, I didn't always have that. And then I look around, I'm like, there's a lot of people I know that don't have that outlet. That actually, that conversation happens in here, and that's a bad conversation. Versus, so me and Lawrence, who you also know, right? We have every Saturday morning, right? Rain, hail, or shine. We're in Sydney, so normally shine. We go for a walk around Sydney, right? It's a 13-kilometer walk. We do it every Saturday morning. No topics off, right? We talk about anything, but there's no ego there, right? There's no competition. There's no combat, right? And we talk about soft things and hard things. Like we talk about all the different things. And just having that outlet, sometimes I give myself the best advice just telling a story out loud. And then sometimes he actually gives advice, but it doesn't matter. It's a safe environment. But without that story just lives in here, right? That's a dangerous story when it lives just in your head.
Yeah, and I think a couple of most of the crew I hang with, it's having that a person that you can just be who you are with, and they call bullshit on you too,
Well, that's the thing. They know when to put an arm around you, and they know when to give you an uppercut, right? They know when to do that. Yeah. You might need to just wind that one back, or when to give you that. It'll all be all right. But that's what we have in our life, right?
And you nailed it, though. I think I've men, and obviously to a greater extent, I think, and some, obviously, but I think loneliness is the epidemic that everyone's talking about, and I think people have more connections nowadays than they've ever had.
In volume, right?
In volume, but I think the numbers in the States are like, I think it's up to 20-30%. I can look it up for you, but the number of people who don't have one close friend they can share things with, that's a staggeringly high number for me.
It is. And it's like, for modern day society, for all the things we have solved, that feels like a basic thing we should be able to get a bit better at, right?
Yeah, so connection. Back to the ancient principles,
Yeah. Back to philosophy. So, Andy, we agreed 3 topics for you. I mean, we could have agreed 30 for you because I've hung out with you enough times, and you're an absolute mischief. But the 3 chapters we're going to do. So, human-machine paradox. I love that one. That's one that we've been exploring a bit. We had Professor Genevieve Bell, on the other week from ANU, talking about like how we understand systems and technology and the interlock of humans. So I love that. Reawakening the human, chapter 2. You've spoken about this before, and I love this sort of like, how do we understand like how to be uniquely human and what that feels like? And number 3, creativity, which I think you mean in the most literal sense, right? How do we create better ways of working? How do we create better environment? How do we be better at what we do? How do we just create and do more? So love those. Let's start with the human machine paradox. Just talk us through what you mean there and why you think that's important right now.
Yeah. Look, it came to me years ago. We're always looking ahead. In competitive world I live in, there's always what's next. And I'm always trying to think, how do we prepare the talent for that next thing, what's coming? And there's always tactically what's coming, an Olympics, an event, a big presentation, an album release or something. But then there's what are the waves that we're seeing in the world? What are the big movers that are coming towards us that we also have to adapt for? And it struck me years ago, and I just sort of thought about that. It was a paradox to me. So I said, I'll just call it this talk I was doing for the Air Force up here at one of the bases. And it basically speaks to the notion of, in this sort of day and age of accelerating technologies, and you can talk of AI agents and all the rest, but just technology in general across the board, that role and that technological advancement is set, and it's accelerating, as you probably noticed. It's exponential on every level, on every measure. So what does that mean for us as humans in that conversation, in that partnership? So for us, it's like, well, if the machine is going to be all seeing, all hearing, all knowing, pretty much, which it is, what do we bring to the table? And so the paradox is this gives us an opportunity to reset ourselves as humans back to those traditional and, if you like, native conversations around what it really means to be human. So empathy, compassion, intuition, virtue, courage, temperance, the classic virtues, if you like, the creativity of the world, because that is all we bring to the table now in the conversation. And the way I explain to people really sort of simply is, when you sit down with an AI agent, what do you bring into the conversation?
Yeah. What are you bringing? You know what that's bringing? What are you bringing?
What are you bringing? And, years ago, back in 2012, we did that massive global program on creativity, hacking creativity.
Yeah.
One of our partners and colleagues at the time, Norman Seif, was interviewing Ray Charles, or had done previously to the program. And he has a perfect analogy for today. And this is how our world works. How do the creatives learn? How do we learn from the athletes? How do we share and cross-pollinate that example we gave before? And the narrative, he says, basically says, when you sit down in front of a piano, the piano has everything in it. You can't even imagine. It's unfathomable what the piano is capable of doing. He literally says, it has everything in it. You can only bring your best self to the piano. If you can imagine it, you can do it. So if you think of that analogy, the AI being the piano, in the next few years, well, even right now, but let's give it another 18 months.
Yeah.
The only thing separating you from everyone else is how good is your imagination? How creative are you? And when the machine is giving you some feedback or giving you some information, ethically, morally, where do you stand? Intuition, it can't tap. So if it gives you a decision and you start to feel something's off or something's
feel.
But
that's the key word you just used there, right? That differentiation.
That's the paradox.
Yeah.
That's the paradox. The machine is going to get so smart, allows us to become actually more human.
Yeah.
And as we look at our training evolutions right now for our elite leaders, our elite business groups, the technical side of it, no worry. It's literally a good mate of mine. You met him, Peter Rea. He's like, nowadays, it's like we always knew, character before competency. You can hire for competency, or the machine can have competency, but the character is what you have. So we have character training development. We have creativity training, which is honestly, as you look back thousands of years, what we did many, many years ago in the last couple.
That's what it feels like. Like we're going through a bit of a renaissance. But like if you just think about the world as it is today, right, and you play a lot in the reality. Like I know you work with elite people that are looking for that nth percentile, but you're playing in the like the normal world as well with normal people trying to achieve normal things. How equipped do you think we are for that paradox you talked about? Because I feel like I'm nodding as you're saying it, and then I'm thinking about some customer like hangouts I've had recently where I'm like, I don't think they're thinking that way. I think they're thinking like they're the machine and they're trying to compete with the machine.
That's the thing. The biggest narrative we've seen again in the say the business world, has been this. Okay, I got to do AI. This I got to learn this AI course. Got to learn how to code in AI. And I'm like, whoa, yeah, maybe. But the reality is, if you start building out some of these other human characteristics with your group, you can start to actually bring that together. Because still, it's humans sitting eye to eye across the table. You've still got to engage. You've still got to shift behaviors as a coach. You can have all the information in the world, but if you want to change behaviors, you still need to know how to move the human. And that's that human to human connection, which, again, given the last 5 years and the whole, hybrid work situation, we've lost a lot of that. So we're actually probably at a lower point in our history with these skills than we've ever been. So
we actually feel a little bit more tactical, right? Or a little bit more transactional. I think we're relying on past relationships as a foundation that sometimes might be crumbling, right? And we're like, but it's going all right. Like, it's going all right because of the past relationship. But what about the new relationship, and where do you build that foundation?
Yeah, and what do you really value? What do you really value as an organization, as a human? You value that connection. You value that ability to be real and be back to who you are, what you stand for. The user manual is makes you question yourself, your self-awareness. So this sort of conversation now, as I said, the training we're doing at the highest level is is just focused on these things. It could be creativity and leadership. It could be character-based training. How do you build? How do you select for character? All these sorts of things now, because it's a skill set that is less talked about, less discussed.
Or seen as soft. It's seen as a soft thing, right? Or as a nice to have.
And what drives the CFO batshit is you can't measure it.
Go and measure it.
Oh, where's the ROI? And I'm like,
which is weird because again, like my instinct says, if as an exec team, I'm more connected. We got each other's back. We understand each other. We work better together. That is yielding a net result somewhere. Do I need to shove a thermometer in someone to work out how hot they are? No, like directionally, it feels like it's the right thing to do. But I think we've lost some of that trust and nuance, right? It's like if you can't measure it, it didn't happen, which I feel is very 1990s, 2000 versus going, what are the right things to do and how do we know we're having the right impact in the medium to long term, which seems like a harder conversation to have.
And in reality, the data's there. If you look at Gallup, give or take what you like, they're globally the most research-centric organizational behavior analysts. And their number one finding, every time they do their global survey, millions of data points, is that, 70% of the performance of the team is directly attributable in the engagement to their leader. So
it's scary.
It's the number is so clear. And then when you go to an organization and you go, leadership, it's not really doing what we want them to do. And we're like, well, how many days in the last 2 years have you spent training? One, maybe two.
Which was, as we mentioned before we started recording, it's an offsite with Mentos and some chilled water in a crappy hotel somewhere. And you're like, you didn't change the world, right? All you did was a dance around mediocrity. You maybe talked about what you did last year and I want to do 1% more next year, but you're not fundamentally changing your approach, right?
No. And humans are the most complex individual entity in the universe. It's pretty clear. And they're hard. They're really hard. So a team of people and working with them takes time. But once you do that work and you start to see that feedback and
payback,
you see the difference. And again, I'm not here to make you the best salesperson or the best military operator or the best athlete. I'm here to help you understand who you are as a human. You'll figure out how to get good at what you do.
If you get that,
so that's the part that we're starting to see that shift. Because I think, I hate to say it, but globally, most of the planet's hurting pretty bad right now on multiple levels. And when you look at the research on the polycrisis and all that's popping up, you start to see that this is now impacting mental health and everything else around the way. So I have a spy in my room here. So
I love it. She's more than welcome. She's not getting paid for it.
We can edit this out.
No, I'm saying in because it's the reality of life, mate. This is the lived experience of people in this day and age. Like I'm trying to talk about elite leadership, and my 13-year-old daughter's just stuck into
comes in here and trying to find her iPad.
That's it.
But anyway, that's the reality, Dom, and this is the greatest frustration I think we have in the world of work we do. There's so much upside. There's so much potential. So Andy,
let's take that upside, right? If we were to give our listeners, our viewers right now, like a tip, a hack, a thing they could do to understand like this human machine paradox, something that they can do right now to get better at this, what would it be?
Well, I think just realize it's coming and you can put your own spin on the narrative. Ask yourself this question, which we did before. If the machine is all-knowing, all-powerful, all-seeing, or hearing, which it will be, it basically is now, but it technically is. What are you as a human or as a team, or how are you going to interact with that knowledge base? How are you going to use that asset?
And what's your unique proposition?
What is your unique proposition? And you sit down to that conversation, and as a team, are you going to focus on everybody being aware of where the dollars and cents are? Is that the best use? If the machine's tracking all that beautifully for you, then together, let's work out how we can imagineer, how can we create, how can we share, how do we develop each other, how do we bring each other up? And as a leader, encouraging your team to spend more time and effort on that, I think is critical. And pragmatically, I know you love that, is every time people now say getting a team together for either a big call or an offsite, I'm like, you should not even be talking about budgets and business plans and all the technical, tactical stuff that we can do online. You're getting the group of humans together. Make sure you're getting the most out of bringing a group of humans together. Inspire them, co-create them, get to know each other, use the user manuals, the iOSs, whatever it is, bring those humans together and get them to know more about each other. And all those other issues you're having as a team will fall away.
Mate, I love that. We the leadership team I'm a part of, we're planning an offsite in Europe in a month or so. And one of the things we did was list everything down that we could possibly talk about. Like it was everything we could talk about. And then we cross out anything we can do asynchronously or online. So the only things left are the only things we can uniquely do in person. That's where the bar is. And you're like, oh, you know, we could do a read through of last quarter's performance. No, could do that online. Next. So and it's brutal because we've crossed through quite important stuff, but it doesn't require high fidelity in-person conversation. So we're saving that precious time for that precious moment.
And those precious moments really come down to trust, building communication, learning about each other. If you can train on the intuition, the feeling, the imagineering, the creativity, if you can, those sorts of things are very valuable. What are you doing to bring new ideas in? What are you doing to challenge the mindset of the group? And that's where those offsites that do actually go and bring in the guest speakers from other worlds or bring other perspectives in, or you're visiting different places. With brilliant people, you don't teach them anything. All you can do is give them a little bit more perspective and they'll run.
Mate, one of the guests I've got on in a few weeks is a criminal profiler, a behavioral psychologist, and met them at an event, and it was a corporate event. I'm like, I'm over the moon that you're here, but like, why are you here? And I talked to the event organizer. They're like, here's the industry we play in, and we always bring industry experts, and it's really boring. So we've just gone like completely tangential and just like opening people's aperture. Their aperture's gone like that, and we're just trying to open it out. And again, it's an indulgence, but it's actually, I think it's a great indulgence.
It's worth way more value. That's where glimpses started. You don't know anybody who's turning up. And if we're talking, we had that FBI profiler there several years ago. And what was it about? That was about understanding how to communicate more effectively. In profiling, you have to understand the other person so deeply, so you know exactly how to speak to them. So there's so much to be learned. And again, it's the classic analogy of people are typically really good in their silo, in their wheelhouse. So what are you doing to yank them out of that? So that's our work.
Yeah, which is the philosophy of every event I've ever been to with you. Just quickly, you mentioned before something I want to just sort of hone in on quickly. You mentioned morals, right? You mentioned trust, right? With on the technology side, right? Where do you sit on this spectrum of, the machine will do everything, just trust it, versus this natural pessimism sort of in the middle where we're curious versus the don't trust anything. Should always be a human in the loop. Like, how do we start to understand humanly what's playing out for us there?
Well, I think if you're bringing something to the table of value, that you're critically thinking, you're inquisitive, you're curious, you have a good moral character and standing based on, the values of the organization you're with, then that's critical in that narrative because it doesn't have any of that.
Yes.
But if you haven't developed all those skills and you just want to challenge it on the numbers that it's spitting out, good luck.
Yeah, because then you're in combat. You're in a low EQ combat. I'm going to win. I'm going to beat you mode, which no one wins.
Yeah. Which I think is where the whole the earliest sort of evidence on human machine teaming is the same critical issue that human teaming faces. It's trust. So the earliest programs we saw at DARPA were trust. How do you know when the machine is right or wrong? Because if you don't trust the machine, you'll ignore it. Yeah. Which is a big reason why a lot of airline crashes happen, because the human overrides the machine. Yeah. But on the other side, if it comes up with something a little bit, ethically challenging, some of the stuff we see globally in the military, you're like, whoa. That may be winning the battle, but we got to pull that one back because it doesn't have the long-term consequences of this talent, this sort of decision process. So to my narrative so far and what I've been seeing globally is there's no really important system that is sort of defaulted to the machine per se.
But there's something you just said there, Andy, that I think we need to just repeat. So it was, I think it got lost in the words. It's not that you don't trust what the machine said. It's that as a human your position. So morally what you stand for. Therefore, when the machine says something, you have a frame of reference to challenge it, not because of distrust, because you want to challenge, which is very different than going, I'm sat here waiting for the machine to be wrong because I'm right.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in the, again, you think it's just going to know, it's going to have, the machines that sit on boards and they can reference all the research for the last 50 years, earnings reports, and they can do all the numbers. So use that talent, use that, ask it to bring up the queries that you're interested in. And then when it brings up that interesting piece of information, then your job is in the human side of the equation is it forcing us down a decision path that's aligned or not aligned to our value set?
Yes.
Are we curious about that? There seems to be something. What is the other story behind that narrative? And you can partner with that conversation in that way. So that, to me, again, what are we developing in our training and our development and our focus with our humans to give that human capability even more air?
Yeah, because in that world, the human needs to be really centered and comfortable in themselves to be able to interpret what they're seeing. And if you've got questions in your head already, then you're just going to project those onto the machinery, right? That makes complete sense.
And I think, the paradox is beautiful because it does give us an opportunity for us to now, as humans, really sit down and think about what's important to us.
Well, that's what I want to go on to next, because we've got Reawakening Human, right? Reawakening the Human is chapter 2. I want to start this, if you can, just indulge us for like 60 seconds. You've done some maverick shit in your time, right? And every time we hang out, normally over dinner and drinks, you're like, oh, let me tell you, right? And there's a little something you tell me, and I'm like, please tell me that didn't happen. And it normally did. Whether it be experiments you do with executives, bears in the woods, right? Or snakes, and feel like, just give us an example of one human experiment you've ran and what the thought process was behind it. Just indulge us in your world for a minute.
Oh boy! I mean, I know you want me to talk about the bear one.
I talk about any. I love them all, but just one that, because I think the reason I mention it is each one of them just gives us an analogy in that they're not actually technological, they're human, but they're also normally quite natural based, right? There's something quite core right in them.
Yeah, so the simplest ones would be, say, the really simple, without having bears charging you off snake pits and all the rest of it, is to get a human into a space where their normal day-to-day level, you'd probably call it comfort zone, but their normal capacity for what they're used to doing and performing is removed. So you're taking away some of the pillars that they normally lean on. So let's go to the wilderness. Just the general wilderness is the easiest one. You take someone, we take a group of executives, and we drop them into the middle of the wilderness. And if you bring them, Australian executives, drop them into Alaska.
Yeah.
The reality is they're off balance. That whole premise. So suddenly their mind, and they start to awaken this, oh my God, I got to pay attention. And then as you're walking through and things are rustling in the woods and, and they're not used to the bears and the things like that. And so there's this, you're getting this very visceral and heightened a reawakening of the senses. Like I'm starting
so you're almost arousing, not in the sexual sense, but you're arousing different senses.
Oh yeah, you're arousing. So the principle being, your mind is now hyper focused on the present. You're not thinking about tomorrow. You're not thinking about yesterday. You're thinking about what the hell is that noise? If we, game it a little in our favor, where where we bring in the grizzly or we do something that unintentionally and nobody knows about it, people are then like, oh my God, I'm back to this very raw, primal state. And what we're trying to do is use that as a blow them, the blind is way open and get people to reconnect with that feeling. Your smell increases, your hearing's getting to tune, your vision. After a couple of days, people are like way back into this sort of mindset where they probably would have been a few hundred years ago. And from there, it's a great spot to start to bring in sort of more pragmatic conversations and things about, because you've reawakened the senses. And when you realize how much of that we've lost, take a walk with some of the traditional owners. Jeff Hardy, a good colleague. Go for a walk with him in the woods in the bush in Australia, and just what he sees. Then if you go with an Indigenous tracker or somebody like that and see how attuned they are to every part of that environment. So first and foremost, what are they hearing, seeing, smelling, touching? And then you realize, oh my God, I'd be done out here. And that's where you realize how far off that we are. Now you can argue, well, big deal, I don't need those skills every day. Well, that's fair. But I also think there's a narrative in there of once you kind of reawaken those sort of primal kind of models in your brain, you start to think about things very, very differently. And that's the feedback we get all the time. So
I think that's the thing to explore. So you're not saying to people, like, you're not saying we're back in the savannah and it's life or death, right? We don't need to be in that mode, but going through something that reconnects you back to that world will awake senses that might actually be valuable for you in solving today's problems.
Yeah, and you can do it. The natural setting is perfect because it accelerates everything, and there's a lot. You know, everybody's talking about how to train for uncertainty. Well, the natural world is so uncertain; it's the perfect training. But just taking a group of people and putting them in a situation that they're not used to. So, you know, we use a lot of the stand-up comedy and the Cirque du Soleil stuff. We've used that for 15, 20 years. Getting on stage and trying to create a character and do that, if you're not trained, is a very whole. I've got to try and pull a whole lot of things in here that I haven't lent on. You're fundamentally giving everyone a chance to be dropped into a space where they're a beginner again. That's the reality.
So let's just like go through for you, because there's a few examples you just threw in there, right? And I know you shared these with me before. It's where you take someone who's like an expert in that specific field, and almost at the nth percentile. You're like, I know there's a mutual friend we've got, RC at San Antonio Spurs. Last time I went there, I'm like, why aren't the basketballers playing basketball? And the coach was like, because they've played basketball all their life, and they had them doing shadow boxing. And I'm like, but they're not boxers. And they're like, no, but there's no point doing more basketball. So we're trying to teach them an orthogonal skill. You take that on steroids and actually put people in environments of deep discomfort. So it's the stand-up comedy, right? They could be a fighter pilot who's doing elite stunts, and you're like, that's cool. You're really gnarly at that, but I'm going to put you on stage with a microphone. You're going to do impromptu comedy, or Cirque du Soleil. You're going to explore and arts and enjoy yourself. To take them back to what is it to be a base level again.
It's basically to bring them back to that beginner's mindset, and also because when I take it, so here's the pragmatic. The best in the world walks into your room and I want to get better at my craft, and you're like, well, nobody knows how you're doing what you're currently doing, so I can't even imagine. And to your point, they've been training that craft thousands and thousands and thousands of hours. So what's another hour going to do? And for many of our world, in the government, the military, and some of the action sports, pushing them that hard in that environment will get them killed, like literally. So the reality is you can't take that training environment to the extreme that's required. So the part of what you can do is rip them over into another environment that they have no history in, they have no ego tied to, which is important. So they can fail a lot and they don't really care. So they get into this failure as a learning kind of mindset. And then everything's accelerated. All the time frames are accelerated. So what would it have taken you maybe a few hours to get them ramped up to the point where they're challenged and struggling? All right, you're up on stage now. Entertain the room for the next 20 minutes. Stand up and they're done. And they get to feel these emotions. So what they're really learning very quickly is how do they respond when things aren't going according to their plan, so to speak. And then they start to react to those triggers. And once you learn about the triggers, it doesn't matter what context you're in. People go, why am I learning about sport when I'm a businessman? You're not learning how to do the sport. You're learning about tactical, technical tools that they've developed to navigate what they do, and you'll figure out which ones work for you.
Yeah, the stand-up comedy is just an analogy, right? It's not, I want you to go and become a stand-up comedian. It's like, I want you to feel discomfort, realize the consequences, no one died, realize that you have a capability you actually managed. And I remember one of the first times we hung out, you taught me through the difference between react and respond. And I've still got that with me today. Like the reaction is in the moment, but the response is just a little bit more considered.
Yeah, it very simply, there's three parts to it. So if you're in a challenging environment, first thing you got to reframe. What can I learn from this versus, oh my God, if I make a mistake, I failed. So it's literally challenge versus, threat. A challenge I can learn and grow from. So I'm up on stage, I may look like a fool, but I'm going to learn something about myself versus the threat of I'm a fool. The next step is that assumption versus assessment. And this is where most people struggle. Humans by design, again, this is one of the trade-offs of being an ancient species, is the systems are all pretty ancient. We're running around on old software, so to speak. In any environment where there's a level of uncertainty, and think about that for a second in today's world, humans will default to worst case because that was a survival mechanism. So you will default to, holy hell, what's the worst that can happen and how do I get out of here? But the assessment is usually that moment of what's really going on. I'm on the stage. What could really happen? I can look like a fool, but really, is anyone going to care? No one's really care,
But in your ancient world, that is, I hear a rustle outside.
Yeah.
Am I in the savannah about to be eaten by a tiger? No, I live in Sydney. There's no tigers outside, right? So, but if my reptilian brain goes to that mode of I'm in the savannah, then I've got to survive. Versus going, I'm actually fine. Out of curiosity, what could that be?
Yeah, exactly. And in the modern world, that sort of threat response that we have, the flight or fight, doesn't serve us well at all. Hence, that's a bigger conversation for another time.
Yeah.
But the reality is, then you get to a position. Okay, what do I learn from this? What's really going on? Boardroom. We've used this example. You're doing your big presentation, and the CEO or someone steps up and says, "What?" Immediately, oh God, I haven't even got going. What are they out? You go. So no, maybe they just can't hear you. Maybe you got the wrong flight. Who knows? So assess, and then you're in a position to respond, which is making a decision that is towards the direction you'd like to go versus reaction, which is random, which is the classic reaction for all of us who've got kids. I know you've got twins as well, mate. Is all day you're exhausted, so we've rammed you anyway. You've had a tough day. You hit the traffic on the way out of Sydney. Everything's tough. You come into the door, your kids are too young, but they do something stupid and you yell at them. And
they do something stupid every day, Andy. That's not too young. They do that every day. That's all right.
Well, they do that. And then you yell. They're too young to yell at, probably.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? And then 2 minutes later, you're like, well, I didn't need to do that. And that's that pause. So it is slightly delayed in that respect. So that's the model. And that's all that training is, walking you through over and over and over again in as many scenarios as we can come up with, so that you get to learn how to do it.
So just list off those 3 steps, right? Step 1 is threat versus
challenge.
Threat versus challenge. So that's a reframe. Is this right? Okay.
Challenge mindset. What can I learn from this?
What can I learn?
What could go wrong?
Step 2 is assessment versus assumption.
So assumptions, you will default to worst case scenario. So check yourself. And is there a potentially other explanation for what's going on? Which most of the time it is. We know that. Glass half full versus half empty. And then you make a decision. You take a breath and you respond.
How do I want to respond? And that's the directional thing, right? In service of the thing I'm trying to achieve, not react, which is just to throw my toys in the air.
Yeah, random. Reactions are random. Now, and even at the highest levels, you may go through that in the wrong way, then react, but you're quick to bring it back. Whoa.
Yeah.
You never circumvent that system. That's the trick. People go, I want to learn how to never be stressed. Well, good luck. You'll be dead.
You just need to give up. Yeah, you just need to switch off.
You're going to get stressed. You're going to overreact. You're going to do the wrong thing.
Understand it.
But just rip it back. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it. And the big part of our work is learning that cycle, practicing that cycle, practicing how to AAR after the cycle, and then repeat. Yeah.
So that's ARR is the after action review, right? That's where you. We have lots of pre-mortems, post-mortems, and reviews. You do the same thing. Like after every event, like what's the reflection? What can we learn? So we'll share those assets afterwards. Just before we go on to creativity, can you just let us know what you did with the bear? Because I'm sure there's some people watching going, "What happened with the bear?"
So, with an elite group, so let's just make the context: highly trained athletes and some entrepreneurs, actually founders in this group. Creating multiple scenarios over a week, so this training evolution goes for a week, requires us to continually come at them with different things. Now, how do we game it? How do we set it up? And this will make sense to everybody. Well, how do we get you a little bit ramped even before we do anything? Well, we maybe, take a little, the flight in is long, the ride in the bus from where we go to the thing is long. We're starting to stack the frustration in our favor. We make sure. In this particular camp, one of the training evolutions was bomb disposal. So we used our team from the EOD and had to take, there's a challenge, here's the bomb, you got to go in and, cut this, do that, whatever. But we also booby-trapped some of the hotel rooms every night. So they'd go bang with a light. So people weren't getting a lot of sleep. Some people resorted to sleeping in the corridors. So the whole thing, and then we're physically training hard. So we're going long hours. And then each day we do a big education session. I want to make sure that goes through. Whole morning of how do we navigate this? What are the tools? What are the techniques? We go deep into those 3 areas. And then in the afternoon, there's some unforeseen challenge of whatever level. It can be very simple, it can be very quiet. It can be spending time with yourself for a few hours. It can be that straightforward. But at some point, we like to create what we call an anchor experience. It's just one experience which is just going to bring as challenging as we can make it. And so in this particular case, we were doing the whole event in Montana. We'd been doing all week, all these things. They'd been pushed and shoved, not slept. So they're already right at that prime point of just like, frustration. And then we took them up into the hills and the mountains for the last day's activities. And we sat them down in the middle of the sun with their backs to the forest, to the woods. And I was giving the world's worst hydration lecture, like boring, slow, sweating. They were like exhausted. And for the whole week, unbeknownst to them, we've been training Bart the bear, which is the one you see in Legends of the Fall and those movies, to run through this particular spot. So we'd hired Bart as an actor. He's a sad card in Hollywood. And so right on cue, a trainer who was dressed as a construction worker, like a linesman, so he had the neon vest, comes running through, go, get out. And he comes running through, and then he trained Bart, who was his protege, to run after him. Yeah. So, of course, everybody got up and started to, holy, what the hell, we're in Montana, it's a grizzly. The reality was, aside from the reporter who we'd let run, we had to stop them running because of the a few of them were going to the Olympics in a few weeks. But for the most part, the ones who trained and practiced the most, had the most training, stood their ground and recognized, did the exercise. As crazy as it seems, they stood their ground.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Bart, the Bart, who's actually a big teddy bear, basically, sees everybody run and jump, and he freaks out. He stops. So then you kind of got this straight off. So anyway, that was the bear story. So it was just, and that's an anchor experience. So forever in their life, they have this one time when things get challenging, hard. It's a memory that will cue for them, and they can cue it, whatever they're doing.
Yeah. But I mean, the takeaway for me, every time I hear one of those stories is you're doing little bits of the experience to try and break people, to take away the normality and the comfort zone. You're training them in a response that they should do in theory, but you're training them in a theoretical, but then you're giving them as close as you can to a live example of that to go, hey, when that actually happened, how did you respond? Did you go back to what you've learned, or did you go back to where you were before? And I think that's for all leaders out there. It's like every time we go to a conference or something, like, are we taking the thing we learn and applying it? Or are we just sticking it in a drawer somewhere? Because if it's in a drawer,
that's the thing with this sort of training. This is where leadership training is broken. You can't learn any of this from a PowerPoint.
No,
it does not work. You can go through the theory all day and feel really
good. Yeah. And you can nod your head ad nauseum.
You nod your head and go, I get it. And you can take one or two of the little tactics and probably implement them. But to really see how to build and help people, you've got to give them a really world experience. And for most people, it goes fabulously well when it all goes according to plan.
Yeah.
I'm a hero. It's going great.
Yeah.
That's not
that's not what you're training them for. You're training them for the proverbial.
Everybody gets it right when it's going to plan. You know, it's classic. It's the Mike Tyson conversation. Yeah. Everybody has a plan until I hit him in the face. And that's right.
Yeah. And then,
So
very different.
We openly create real world scenarios, which is supported. It's a big laugh, as you know. But that moment of when it really happens, people get a chance to test, and they get better so quickly.
Yeah,
that's the thing that kills me. If you spend 2 weeks training leadership deeply in a pragmatic and tactical environment, you will see light years.
It's groundbreaking. Yeah, it's a leap. It's an absolute leap. Well, we spend 10 minutes doing it. Yeah, we spend in the business world, we spend 99% of our time doing and 1% learning, right? And in your world, it's 99% learning. So let's move on to chapter 3, Andy. Move on to creativity. We'll be quick on this one because I'm conscious of your time. But like, what's your view on like societally where we at with creativity, and what's the reframe we need to do to tap into it? I feel like it's an essential asset for us to live more thriving lives, but I think it's maybe underbaked.
I think completely underbaked with respect to the opportunity there. So creativity, let's get down. What is it? You know, we did this, we recognized early on that at every level of mastery, at any frame or discipline you pick, those who are leading the world are reimagining what's possible in that field. They reimagine, so they redefine the game, whether it's sport, business, you know, everybody you look to who's a world leader in the non-classic creatives, i.e. non-arts, non-music.
Yeah.
They are hyper creative. It's just never been. So you got to get.
It's not called creativity, is it? It's called something different.
Yeah, and so in business you got to use the word like innovation, and in sport you've got to use the word competitive advantage.
Yeah.
You know, in the military it's about winning. It's that black and white. It's about winning. So the reality is, whatever you call it, it's the idea of reimagining the field you're in to give yourself an opportunity to lean into something new and do something that's no one else is doing. Hence, innovation, competitive advantage, whatever the hell you want to call it.
Whatever flavor you want to call it, it's about creating a new vision or a new view of what that environment could look like. And
a new view, it's creating the new future. So the reality is, for us, it's such a powerful part. And we did a massive research project way back in the day when it was much more challenging, where we had the machine, I think 2011, read every piece of research on creativity and summarize it and put it together. Nothing like what you see today. Your phone does it now, but it took us 2 years and a ton of cash. But the reality was, we started to see patterns emerging. So for us, again, I sort of probably said at the beginning, as the human skill of the future, it is probably on the side of the top 3 of the most important skills we need to have. And I think couldn't agree with you more.
And also, let's just call it what it is. It should be a top 3, and I don't think it is a top 3 right now. If we were to score ourselves, it's not. So if you imagine, I'm imagining the majority of leaders that I interact with on a regular basis would be like, yes, and Andy, I need to be better at that. What's a pragmatic way, if you're a leader sat there in any industry, any business right now, and you want to get better at creativity in that broader sense, what can they actually do to do that?
So we basically designed, based on all that research, the whole community got together and said, all right, what are the common elements? Can I make you Picasso? No. Just let's get out of that stupid conversation.
Yeah.
Is creativity about how well I paint or write music? No. It's about how can you reimagine that future like we spoke about and then put action against it. That's where the ideas are, everybody's got ideas, like the old saying goes. But the reality is, so what's the model? So if you look and study all those high creatives, and luckily enough, living here in Hollywood, it's a gold mine of creativity over the hill here. Imagineering is step 1. Imagineering. What are you doing to create a different perspective or a different framework or a different a model in your brain?
Yeah.
Many people do that. Guest speakers, different perspective. But you've got to really focus on that, and you actually have to take it, I think, a lot further than just having Dom roll up once every 6 months and do You've got to really be intentional, and we're really interested in this particular part of our industry. It's non-typical. Who are the most non-typical perspectives I can get on that? So you make it intentional, and that drives what you call the Imagineering, coming up with the broad-based ideas. In that context, then, and this is one that most people don't get, is how do you then sell that vision?
Yeah.
How do you, once you've come up with an idea, especially in an organization, maybe as a business leader, that no one else is doing, how do you actually get people on board? And so you need to become a salesperson. So then you get into these really powerful sales conversations. How do you organizationally bring
storytelling and pitching and convincing and
the whole thing. So that's the second skill you can train independently. So you got these great, then we got to train. All right, we're doing something. I'm doing the Steve Jobs thing here. No one knows they need an iPhone yet. I got to convince them all they do. Then the next part, which is really hard for teams, is that for groups, is you've got to select a team. The team for execution against a never been done before problem is not the same team that is, I'll be blunt, running the business day-to-day business off.
Yeah, amen. Yeah.
And you don't want the day-to-day business off being hyper creative with your bottom line,
No. You don't want them going off at tangents and getting distracted. You're like, you do like, and it's weird. They often get painted as better or worse, and I don't think they're better or worse. They're just different. It's just like introvert and extrovert isn't better or worse.
No, and you need both.
Yeah.
Once you figure out, once you've come up with the idea, now you've built this team. Part of that team needs to make sure that there is in the business world, there's some fiscal security built in there at some level, whatever the tolerance is. And there's at least we're communicating back. So the reality is you've got to then know how to do that. So you get into selection and assessment. Leading creative teams is a completely different leadership style than leading tactical teams. And so that's a thing you can train. It's very easy to train if you know the principles. Again, not everyone's great at it. So that's the challenge.
I accept that, but
it's something you got to do. And then, you've got to actually, the creative process itself, I built the team. Now I've got to start and I've got to start get this project rolling. I've got to start to build it with my team, and I've got to start to navigate that whole thing. So that's where actually nowadays the machine is super powerful. How are you using the chats and using that as a partner to test ideas? And one of the best ways to use the machine right now is to throw a bunch of stuff at it and just get feedback.
Quick loops, quick learning loops.
So using that in the creative process. And then you get into this space, you've come up with the idea, you've sold the vision, you've built the team, you're now running the process through. The next one is the part that really most organizations don't ever do very well, is how do you navigate the uncertainty? Because sure as shit, part of the process of you doing something that's never been done and the money, you've suddenly got the money to do it. Now you're making mistakes. Now you're failing, and the original vision may not be what you thought it would be. And so that ability to handle uncertainty, training to uncertainty, is a classic thing that either the team never gets trained in, so they don't even know how to deal with it. So they don't know how to manage it, aka the bear, or the leadership hasn't given them the right air cover to give them the room.
The right buffer zone. And mate, I mean, there's a pitfall. Every one of those steps is a pitfall. I mean, pitfall number one is you've got to challenge the status quo and think of something net new, right? A lot of teams fail there. Then you're like, cool, now I've now got to become a salesperson, build a narrative, pitch this, get someone bought into it. Then I've got to build the team. Then I've got to lead the team. Oh, and by the way, I've now got to reframe how the BAU stuff should be at 99th percentile, because we've been doing that for 100 years. But this is net new, and we kind of don't know how it's going to look, feel, and smell. And that's a completely different management and leadership style. So we go, cool, let's put a whole of metrics on it, and actually you end up just doing BAU again. You kill it because the conditions.
And then the organization gets nervous and they start, I want to see some ROI. I'm like, oh, it's never been done. How do I can make up some ROI if that makes you feel comfortable, which
I've got two service ROI in the top drawer. Yeah.
So then ultimately the performance, getting it out there and then just getting that feedback and putting it together. So those steps can all be trained independently. Yeah. And you can determine as an organization, ask yourself, how much risk am I willing to take? There's a beautiful thing about being a CEO.
What's my portfolio? And that's a great discussion. It's not like bet the whole company. It's like, am I willing to carve out X to experiment with Y that might achieve Z? And you're like, if you're never doing that, then you're never building a future. Right? All you're doing is polishing the past.
And you're going to get disrupted. They're going to, and that's what happens. So as a CEO, you've got this wonderful opportunity to mitigate risk across the organization. But what's the first thing that goes? First thing that goes when budgets get tight is the R&D, and you're like, guys, that's your future. Your future is the Imagineering, the innovation, the creativity, and you've got to continually double down on it. And it doesn't have to be a new thing; it can just be new processes.
But if you're not doing something to evolve, right, then you're stagnant. You're the anchor slowing things down, and that's
you are the anchor, and that's what happens. And you get into all the other conversations through, the inertial middle of the organization, the boss.
Organ rejection. That's not the way we do. But I think those steps though, each one you can just like systematically do, and not the bet the company. Like pick a project. Cool. I'm going to reimagine what we're going to do while we're going to do it. Right. I'm going to pitch this to a few people and get the feedback. I'm going to build a team on like each of those steps. I think any leader watching this can do. Andy, conscious of time, two things before we wrap up. Question number one: if people want to hear more from you, like they want to hear some of your crazy stories or any of your stuff that you publish, how do they find you?
Oh God, you're probably easiest to go to the Liminal website. So that's me with my genius social media hat on. Go to liminalcollective.com. Easy. There is a bit of stuff on the feed. I know we've been helping people recently, and we've been pushing out some stuff just to get their stories out on the LinkedIn platform. So that's, and if not, just hit you up at your
anything that where Andy's mentioned, like the after action review, iOS, all that stuff, I'll put that in the show notes. So that's all stuff people can access free of charge to.
It's on our website. That's all on the website. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. So people can play an experiment with that straight away. Andy, as a thank you for your time, we're going to do a $500 donation to a charity of your choosing. Tell us who you would like us to donate to and why.
So a group we've been helping and supporting for many years are very special mission groups that come back and obviously have struggles returning from the deployment. The Station Foundation up in Montana. Kevin Stark runs the place. A bunch of my people that I'm really close friends with support. I help out, and they also have gone through it, and they're just a great organization. The money goes straight through to the use case, so the money's going where the mouth is. So it's a wonderful group. So we'll just get them the cash, and they'll make good use of it.
Awesome. Well, Andy, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, your stories. I reckon I'll have you on for part 2 in a year or so when people come back with a whole lot of questions like what happened with the bear, and when we tell the story about how you took a whole lot of surgeons, handcuffed them to each other, and threw them off the side of a boat. That's another story.
That's a different story.
Another time. Andy Walshe, thank you so much for sharing your stories. Audience members, throw your comments, throw your questions, and we'll share all the dates for people. Thank you so much for joining us, and Andy, thank you so much generously for your time.
Dom, as always, legend, mate. Thank you for everything.